Hello, I'm Manueltos, and today I want to discuss abortion, specifically the issue of the mother's life being at risk as a reason for abortion. And I will be taking an anti abortion position, as that is my actual position, and therefore it is the position that I'm best suited to discuss this issue from. And I do understand that people who do support and endorse abortion will likely take a different perspective on this particular issue. However, let's get right into it. So, a common argument for allowing certain types of abortion is in the case that the mother's life is at risk. So, this is an interesting question because if you simply say the mother's life is at risk, it is a question that doesn't really give you a lot of information to base your answers on. So, obviously, Uh, for this reason, I made a matrix on the mother and the child's life being at risk. So obviously, if neither life is at risk in the top left, the anti-abortion person will typically say that there's no reason to switch to switch in the trolley problem, as I'm using the trolley problem as a vehicle to explain this, uh, as trolleys are indeed vehicles. There's no reason to switch from the trolley moving along a non dangerous path to a path that would put the child or the mother at risk. That is to say, that on demand abortion or abortions in pregnancies where there is no significant medical risk, uh, those are things that anti abortion individuals would certainly agree would not warrant the putting the mother or the child at risk. Now, that being said, on the issue of rape and incest, the anti abortion individuals, depending on the position that they take, if you oppose abortion on the principle that the child has a negative right therefore, a right not to be killed, then rape and incest are obviously going to be invalid reasons for abortion because the act of rape, while it is a very heinous crime, does not negate the negative right of the child to not be murdered under the idea that murder is uh, not permissible, of course. Now, there are perhaps some people that would argue that murder is a permissible action, but that is obviously a different issue. At the same time, if you say, well, it would not be a murder, it would be a judicial killing, then you have to ask the question on what uh, on what particular legal basis is the child being killed in the case of rape or incest? Because in the or also the case of being pregnant as a minor, that's another case people tend to sneak into this argument. And the answer to that question is that under an idea of if we are treating this as a person under the idea of due process and equal protection of the law, it would be difficult to argue that the child could be held responsible for a particular crime, unless you take the extreme libertarian position that you have a right to evict people. Now, that being said, I doubt that most people take that position, especially people that believe things like child neglect are immoral. That is to say, if you have a child, you have a responsibility to care for the child. And if you are not caring for the child, you have neglected that responsibility. And in many countries, that is indeed a crime. So it is a crime, for example, to starve your child when you have food available for yourself. And that is because the parent has a responsibility to the child, and anti abortion activists would argue that this responsibility exists even before birth and also after birth, as there are some people who are so extreme that they would be in favor of a postnatal abortion, also known as infanticide, unambiguously in that case. So, therefore, I would argue that in the cases of rape, incest, the impregnation of a minor, or any other case wherein a neither life is in a risk, I would say that the anti-abortion position, as a position that is also a position that favors equal protection and due process, would be a position that would not justify switching the trolley over to kill either the mother or the child. So, but that should be pretty uncontroversial, I would say. Now, next we're going to look at the top right, and this is the typical part here where the mother's life is at risk, and the question is, should the trolley be redirected using the switch so that the child's life is at risk instead? That is to say, if a mother's life is at risk but the child's life is not at risk, is it justifiable to remove the risk from one life and instead place it onto another? And this exists in a number of different medical situations. And you might say, how could it be that the mother's life could be at risk without the child's life being at risk? Well, obviously, there are two different bodies. So while there might be some conditions that could put both bodies at risk, there are some conditions that would put neither body at risk, or that would put uh, the one body at more risk than the other. That of death, that is, the risk of death. So, an example, a real life example that I heard recently from a few decades ago, was that there was a mother. She was pregnant. She found out she had stage 4 cancer, and she was given the choice of getting chemotherapy. Now, chemotherapy will terminate your pregnancy, uh, barring a miracle, that is. If you are pregnant and you have chemotherapy, your pregnancy will not last. However, she chose to not get chemotherapy and instead to write out her cancer without treatment for the sole reason of protecting the life of the child. And ultimately, she got very sick and she died. And the moment she died, she was cut open and the child was removed from her womb, and the child managed to survive and to grow. So that is a situation where the mother's life was at risk, and although the child's life, you could argue, was at some risk, it was not at the same degree of risk as the mother's life. Uh, so, under that situation, the question is it ever justifiable to switch the risk, the let's say that the life is in the balance, to switch whose life is in the balance without the consent of the person to whom you are switching the risk to? And that's a complicated problem because it is actually the main problem of the trolley problem. Uh, However, in the regular trolley problem, the you would generally have more than one person on the main track, and it essentially is asking you to make a utilitarian calculus on and people who would switch the trolley, or people who believe that you need to maximize the utility to save as many lives as possible in that situation, and that it justifies putting another life at risk that was not previously at risk. Now, people that wouldn't pull the switch in the regular trolley problem, such as I, believe that the ability to save more lives does not justify putting a life at risk, at least not with the consent of a person whose life is being put at risk. Now, I think that's probably the minority position on the trolley problem. However, the question of how many lives are we saving becomes nullified in this particular scenario, where we are instead looking at two different kinds of life. That is the life of an adult and the life of a child. And also, there's the potential complication of having more than one child in the womb, of having twins or triplets or etc. So that's another complication. Now, my position on this would be that I do not believe that switching the risk from one person to another is justifiable in this particular scenario, especially because the child does not have the ability to communicate consent, especially in this scenario. So in that case, I would say that it would be immoral to pull the switch. That is to say, it would be immoral to kill the child if the mother's life is at risk, if the child's life is only at risk by saving the mother's life. So that brings us to the inverse here. The child is at risk, but the mother is not at risk. I also contend that even if there were twins or triplets, it would also be immoral to pull the switch in this scenario, because the mother's life is not at risk. If it is only the child's life that is at risk, and therefore the only situation where it would be moral would be if the mother chooses to take the risk upon herself in order to save the children, which is something that in this case is possible. Now, the question on whether it is probable, that depends. And the final situation, both lives are at risk. And so this could be any number of situations. And I think that this is the situation that people probably imagine when somebody says, well, what if a mother's life is at risk? You might say, what if they're both going to die and you have to save someone? And in this situation, I would say you have to do triage, as it is called. And if you don't know what triage is, in triage, you assign degrees of urgency to wounded or ill patients. So when you're doing triage, you have to ask yourself first of a question: is this person's life actually at risk? If this person is not treated immediately, and then you have to ask yourself, does this person need treatment right away, or is this person beyond treatment, besides maybe palliative care? So can you and you do this in order to divide up patients to save as many lives as you reasonably can. Okay? So in this case, both lives hang in the balance, and you have to ask yourself, is it true that both lives hang in the balance? Or are we in another one of these situations? Is it true that both lives hang in the balance? Or is it the case that actually only one life is at risk, or at serious risk, or that neither life is at risk? Because, believe it or not, I'm sure that there's probably people that would use this as a loophole by attempting to pretend that this situation, the fourth situation, both lives being at risk, is more common than it might actually be. So that is a serious concern of misrepresentation. And if a moral problem is misrepresented, it can lead to the solutions to the moral problem being misapplied. That is to say, if we say that both lives are at risk when neither life is at risk, then if we assume that this is therefore a murder, if you kill someone whose life, or you put somebody's life at risk to kill a person whose life wasn't at risk, then that is a murder. Okay? And therefore, that is a situation that you have to be able to exclude. Another thing you have to then look at is, if we say both lives hang in the balance, both lives are at risk, is there one person who is more likely to be saved than the other? And then, by triage, you save the person that you can save. That is to say, if both lives are at risk, but saving the mother will be much more difficult than saving the child, or vice versa, then the one you should save is the one that you know that you can save. And I think that that's the logical outcome to that situation, assuming you're anti-abortion. Okay? That all of this is assuming that you're anti-abortion, that you would consider a no reason abortion to be a murder. Okay? So, under this situation, therefore, the respective solutions, to summarize, if neither lives are at risk, don't put either of them at risk. So don't pull the switch in the top left scenario. Top right scenario, don't pull the switch. bottom left scenario, don't pull the switch. Bottom right scenario, pull the switch to move the trolley to the person that you are less likely to be able to save. That is, try to save who you can. If possible, try to save both people. But if you can't save both people, try to save the one who's more likely to survive, whether that be the mother or the child. There should be no situation where you have to say that the mother is intrinsically more important than the child. Okay? Now, that being said, I made sure to add in parentheses no collision. So this is a German engineering masterwork railway or trolley track switcher mechanical computer that automatically locks so that you can't switch both of them and that they don't collide and that they take the proper path. Okay, so these crossing paths don't allow you to collide, and also it wouldn't be logical to say that a problem that you could properly pull both switches. Also, that wouldn't be ethical to pull both switches to just exchange both lives. That would be not ethical. Of course, there's a fifth situation where there's two trolleys and where you can't save either of them. There's no switches, no way to get out of it, in which case, obviously, there's nothing you can do about that. But that's not really what people are talking about when they're talking about abortions. People aren't talking about accidental deaths, brutal serial killers. Actually, that is what people are talking about when they're talking about abortions. But people aren't talking about natural miscarriages and other such things. So that was my attempt to explain the issue of the mother's life being at risk in abortion or in pregnancy from, of course, an anti-abortion perspective. So there you go. Thank you all for watching. Please tell me in the comments section below, how would you solve these trolley problems? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you hate me with a burning passion? Am I evil incarnate? Or am I making a decent point? Who knows? Who knows what your opinion is? I will probably agree or disagree with certain opinions, but hopefully there can be a productive dialogue. So thank you all for watching, and I will be seeing you all next time on Awultus over and out.